The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when Daniel Cole pushed open the door to the blood donation room at 12 minutes past midnight. Nobody summoned him. Nobody called. There was no appointment scheduled, no nurse waiting, no clipboard held out in greeting. He simply appeared the way he always did, soaked to the skin, slightly breathless from the walk, wearing a jacket 2 winters too thin for Chicago in December. He signed his name on the register, took his seat in the corner chair, and rolled up his left sleeve before anyone had even asked him to. Nurse Priya Anand, 26 years old and still new enough to this work to be surprised by things, stared at him from across the room. "Sir," she said carefully, "you were just here last month." "I know." He didn't look up. "And the month before that." "I know." She crossed to the register and ran her fingers slowly down the entries. Her breath caught. "Daniel Cole." She said his name like she was reading something sacred. "This is your 48th donation." He looked up then. He had a face that had been through things, deep-set eyes, jaw cut from years of quiet endurance, the kind of stillness that only comes from carrying weight for a very long time. He looked at her, and he almost smiled. "I know," he said again. "Let's not make a fuss." While the needle went in and the bag began to fill, Priya watched him the way you watch someone you cannot figure out. His shoes had a hole in the left sole. His wallet, sitting on the tray beside him, was thin as a postcard. His phone buzzed once. He glanced at it, turned it face down without reading it. But she had already seen the words on the screen before he turned it over. "Final notice, rent overdue." She looked away. 20 minutes later, Daniel Cole rolled his sleeve back down, buttoned his cuff, and stood up. He swayed slightly. She moved toward him, and he held up one hand. Steady, certain, "Thank you, but no." He walked out of the donation room. But instead of turning left toward the exit, he turned right. Priya followed him to the edge of the corridor and watched as he walked, slowly, deliberately, all the way to the children's ward at the far end. He stopped outside the glass. He didn't go in. He just stood there, looking through it at the small shapes in the beds, at the low blue light, at the monitors blinking their patient rhythms. Then he found the night nurse on that ward, a woman named Clara who had been here long enough to know him. And he said, very quietly, "Did the little girl make it through this month?" Clara's eyes filled. She nodded. Daniel exhaled. Something in his shoulders released, just slightly, like a knot untying itself by 1 degree. "Good," he said. He put his hands in his pockets. "That's good." And he walked out into the rain. He had no idea, not even the faintest shadow of a suspicion, that the child behind that glass was Emily Harper, that her father was Richard Harper. That Richard Harper was worth $4.6 billion and had spent the last 4 years trying, with every resource that money could assemble, to find the man who kept saving his daughter's life. He had no idea that the two of them were already in each other's stories. He didn't know yet that everything was about to break open. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what Daniel Cole was doing in that hospital at midnight, you have to go back 6 years. You have to go back to a Tuesday in March when the roads were wet and the light was bad and a truck driver ran a red on Kimball Avenue, and the world divided into a before and an after. Daniel's wife was Sandra. His daughter was Joy. Joy was 9. She had her mother's laugh and her father's eyes and a habit of drawing butterflies on every surface that held still: walls, napkins, the backs of Daniel's hands when he fell asleep on the couch. Their apartment on the north side smelled like her drawings and Sandra's cooking, and when Daniel came home from his shift at the hospital each evening, he could hear them both talking before he even got the key in the lock. He was at work when it happened, pushing his mop down the third-floor corridor, listening to the distant sounds of the hospital doing its relentless work, when his phone rang. He didn't hear everything the voice on the other end said. He heard enough. He sat on the floor of Joy's bedroom for 3 days after the funeral. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He just sat there looking at the butterflies on the walls, dozens of them, in every color she could reach, and tried to understand how so much life could simply stop. Then he went back to work, because that was all he knew how to do. He began donating blood 6 weeks after the funeral. It wasn't a decision exactly. He was walking past the donation room one afternoon when he heard a nurse in the corridor saying, tight and urgent, "We need a match now. She's crashing. She can't wait until morning." And something in Daniel simply responded to those words the way a compass responds to north. He stopped. He said, "What type?" The nurse turned, startled. He said, "I have my donor card. What type do you need?" It matched. He sat in the chair. The bag filled. He went back to work. He came back the next month. And the month after. He never told anyone why. If pressed, he would shrug and say something vague about wanting to be useful. But the truth was quieter than that. The truth was that the grief had left a hollow in his chest, and for 20 minutes every month, in that chair with that needle in his arm, he felt like he was filling it with something that actually mattered. He never asked where his blood went. He didn't want a name. He didn't want a story. He just wanted to know, afterward, that the person had survived. The person always survived. Now, Emily Harper. If you had met Emily before you knew anything about her condition, you would have thought she was simply the most fearless 8-year-old you had ever encountered. She had her father's sharp dark eyes and her late mother's voice and an absolute refusal to be managed by anyone, including doctors who were much larger than her and had considerably more letters after their names. "I already know what you're going to say," she told Dr. Vance once, when she was 7 and he had come in wearing his serious face. "You're going to tell me to rest and take my medication and not get too excited." Yes, that's essentially. I know. She picked up her book. "I'll think about it." Her condition was called congenital dyserythropoietic anemia, type 4, variant 7, a combination of genetic markers so rare that the specialists her father assembled from across 3 continents had published papers about her case. In plain terms, her blood could not sustain itself. Without regular transfusions of a precisely matched blood type, her body would begin to fail. The matching type was extraordinarily rare. Fewer than 250 people in the United States carried it. Finding a donor in time for each crisis was, as Dr. Vance once explained to Richard Harper with the careful phrasing of a man who did not want to be screamed at, a logistical challenge of the highest magnitude. Richard Harper had screamed at him anyway. "Find a donor," he said. "Mr. Harper, we are attempting. Find a donor." He was standing at his daughter's bedside. Emily was 8 years old, and she looked very small against the white sheets. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what it takes. Find the person and pay them whatever they ask." Dr. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "Mr. Harper, there is a donor. He has been donating compatibly for approximately 4 years. He is the reason Emily has been stable." Richard went still. "Who is he?" "I can't disclose that information. Donor privacy." "I will pay you." "Mr. Harper." Dr. Vance held his gaze. "I cannot tell you who he is. What I can tell you is that he is a volunteer. He has never asked for payment. He has been offered compensation twice through official channels and refused both times." Richard stared at him. Of all the things he had been prepared to hear, that was not one of them. "He refused," Richard said flatly. "Both times." Richard looked at his daughter sleeping in the bed, her small chest rising and falling, her hand curled beside her cheek the way it had been since she was an infant. "What kind of person does that?" he said. Very quietly. Dr. Vance looked at him for a long moment. "The kind," he said, "that most of us never become." The night Daniel fainted for the first time, he was alone in the supply closet on the 3rd floor. He had been carrying 2 heavy mop buckets and a box of cleaning solution, moving faster than he should have, and then suddenly the floor came up to meet him with no warning at all. He woke up on his back, staring at the underside of the bottom shelf, with a split lip and no memory of falling. He lay there for a moment. He took stock of his body the way you do when you are not entirely sure what condition it is in. Then he sat up, slowly, and sat with his back against the wall and his eyes closed until the room stopped moving. His first coherent thought was, "I should probably see a doctor." His second thought was, "After my donation next month." He did not see a doctor. He went back to work. The dizziness came and went after that. Some days it was barely there. Some days it sat behind his eyes like a stone. He lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. He started walking more slowly on his shift, rationing his energy the way a man rations food when he doesn't know when the next meal is coming. He said nothing to anyone. The next month, Priya noticed. It was gradual at first, the kind of decline that makes experienced doctors go very still and check their instruments twice. A dip in her red cell count, a slight elevation in bilirubin. By the 28th, it was a crisis. Richard received the call at 6 a.m. and was at the hospital in 12 minutes, still in his coat, his face stripped of everything that wasn't fear. Emily was sitting up in bed when he arrived. She was gray-faced and exhausted, but she was awake, and the first thing she said when she saw him was, "Where's my angel?" Richard looked at the nurses. "She's been asking," Clara said quietly. "She knows when the blood is different." "Her angel," Richard said carefully. "Who is that?" Clara hesitated. Then, "The donor. She knows someone has been giving for her." She decided he must be an angel. Richard sat at Emily's bedside and held her hand and looked at the monitors and thought, with a clarity that sliced through all the noise of his life, that he would burn every building he owned to the ground to find the man who had kept his daughter alive. He left the hospital the next morning. For the first time in 4 days, he drove to Daniel's neighborhood himself. No driver, no security. Just Richard Harper in a dark coat, walking down a block of 6-story walk-ups on the northwest side of Chicago, reading the faces of buildings that had given up on trying to look anything other than tired. The super was a woman named Mrs. Kozlowski. She opened the door the width of one eye, assessed him in 3 seconds, and said, "He's gone. Evicted 6 weeks ago. Do you know where he went?" He didn't say. She studied Richard the way only a woman who has seen 60 years of men on her doorstep can study a man. He left quiet. Took one bag. Tipped me $20 on the way out. Took it from the last money in his wallet. I could see it plain as anything. She paused. He was sick, that one. I don't know with what, but sick. Richard felt something cold move through him. Sick how? Thin. Too thin. Moving careful, like a man trying not to break something. She looked at him steadily. Why are you looking for him? To help him. He said something once, she said. About a lake. Said his daughter used to like feeding the ducks there. He never told me which one. Richard thanked her. He walked back to the car. He sat in the driver's seat for 3 minutes without starting the engine. Then he began to make calls. He went to 8 lakes in 4 days. He went alone, every time. His assistant offered to send investigators. He said no. He didn't know why exactly. Something told him this was not a task he could delegate. Something told him he needed to be the one to look. He found Daniel at Millbrook Lake on a Friday, just before the light failed. He was sitting on a bench at the water's edge, a thin blanket across his legs, his coat not warm enough for the temperature, his duffel bag under the bench like a pillow placed close to someone sleeping rough. He was watching the water. His face was diminished, thinner than any photograph Richard had been able to find, the skin pulled tight across his cheekbones, the eyes still calm, but slower now, like lights on a dimmer switch. Richard sat down beside him, not across from him, beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The water moved. A pair of ducks crossed the surface in a long, unhurried V. Beautiful spot, Richard said. My daughter used to feed the ducks here. Daniel's voice was quiet. She was 9 the last time we came. What was her name? A long pause. The kind that has weight. Joy, Daniel said. Richard sat with that. Then he turned to look at the man beside him and said, Mr. Cole. Daniel turned. My name is Richard Harper. My daughter is Emily. She is 8 years old and she has been alive, repeatedly, for 4 years, because of you. The silence that followed was very deep. Daniel looked back at the water. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was barely above a murmur. I didn't know her name, he said. I never asked. I needed to know she was still there. That whatever I was doing was still working. He stopped. After Joy died, I couldn't. There was nothing. Nothing I could do or fix or give that changed anything. And then one night I heard those nurses, and I thought, this I can do. This one thing I can do. And if I kept doing it, maybe it would. I don't know. He shook his head slowly. I don't really know what I thought. Richard Harper had negotiated in rooms that would have made most men sweat through their suits. He had delivered hard news to boards of directors and hard decisions to governments. He had been in the room when everything was on the line. He had never, in his adult life, cried in front of another person. He put his face in his hands. They sat by the water as the light left the sky. 2 men who had never been in the same room before, sharing the same grief in different shapes, the same loss at different distances, and the particular silence of people who have said something true. After a long time, Daniel said, How is she? Declining. Without the transfusions, Richard stopped. Steadied himself. She needs you. Then let's go, Daniel said. He moved to stand. He swayed. Richard caught him by the arm. He held on. They went to the hospital. Daniel was admitted that same night. Not as a donor, not yet, but as a patient. The doctors who examined him came out of the room with the careful faces that mean the news is not good. Stage 2 lymphoma. Aggressive. It had been progressing untreated for over a year. Why didn't you come in sooner? Dr. Vance asked him. Daniel was propped up in the bed, looking at the ceiling. He thought about the question for a moment. There was always a next donation, he said simply. I kept thinking, after the next one. After she's stable. He paused. I ran out of afters. Richard, in the doorway, said nothing. His jaw was hard. His eyes were very bright. He paid for everything. Not as a gesture, not as a transaction. He paid for it the way you pay a debt you didn't know you'd run up, with a kind of bone-deep reckoning. The treatment team was assembled within 48 hours. The room was better than anything Daniel would have chosen for himself. There were flowers on the windowsill that nobody acknowledged but nobody removed. Emily's transfusion happened 2 days later. She recovered with the terrifying efficiency of children, bouncing back from each crisis like a small, exhausted piece of elastic. By Saturday morning, she was sitting up, eating cereal, and subjecting her nurse to a detailed theory about why hospital gowns should come in different patterns. Richard came in that morning with a man she had never seen. Emily looked at the man. She looked for a long time. That particular focused child look that misses nothing and waits for everything to make sense. Then she said, with absolute certainty, "You're my angel." Daniel stood in the doorway of the room. He was thin and pale and holding the frame with one hand for support. He looked at this girl he had bled for 48 times without ever seeing her face, and something in him, some last locked thing, came open. "I'm just Daniel," he said. "That's the same thing," said Emily Harper. She held out both arms. He crossed the room, and she wrapped herself around him, and he held her carefully, gently, like something he had been afraid to hold for 6 years. He closed his eyes. In the corridor, Priya had both hands over her mouth. Clara was crying without trying to hide it. Even Dr. Vance had found something very important to study on his clipboard at eye level, blinking steadily. And in Daniel's chest, where the stone had lived for 6 years, heavy and cold and permanent, something else was happening. Not the stone going away, but the stone becoming something it hadn't been before. Something that had the weight of joy in it, but also the warmth of this small girl's arms, and the sound of the rain on a hospital window at midnight, and 48 needles and 48 bags and 48 months of showing up. He held on. The months that followed changed two men. Richard Harper began to visit the hospital even when Emily didn't need him there. He walked the wards the way Daniel had walked them, as a person trying to understand something, not to fix it. He sat with other families in waiting rooms and actually listened to them. He asked questions and wrote things down in a notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. His assistant, who had been with him 11 years, found him one afternoon in the oncology corridor deep in conversation with a woman about her son's treatment plan, and she stood and watched him for a full minute before she was certain it was really him. Daniel underwent treatment through the spring. It was not easy. Nothing about it was easy, but he was stubborn in the way of people who have already survived the worst thing and know that endurance is simply a matter of continuing. He moved into the apartment Richard arranged for him and slept in a real bed for the first time in months, and called Priya every few days with updates she already had access to in the system but pretended not to have. In the autumn, Richard established the Joy and Sandra Cole Foundation, named for two women he had never met, who had been loved by a man who deserved to be seen. The foundation funded blood donation infrastructure in underserved communities, mobile units, awareness campaigns, financial support for regular donors in financial hardship. In its first year, it facilitated over 40,000 donations. Daniel sat to the side of the podium at the launch. He was uncomfortable with the attention in the specific way of people who have spent years being invisible and are not sure yet how to be otherwise. He wore a jacket he hadn't owned 6 months ago. His shoes had no holes. Emily stood at the microphone. She was small and fierce and completely unafraid, and she spoke about her angel in a voice that did not waver, and when she was done the room was quiet in the way that means the words have gone somewhere that clapping can't reach. Afterward, Daniel found her standing by the window, looking out at the city. "Did I do okay?" she asked. "You were perfect," he said. She thought about this. "Daniel," she said, "do you think Joy knew about all of it?" He was very still for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that maybe she sent me." Emily considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old who has been considering serious things for most of her life. Then she nodded, once, as though it confirmed something she had already suspected. She reached up and took his hand. He looked down at her small fingers wrapped around his, and he thought about butterflies, crayon butterflies in impossible colors, on the walls of a room that had once held everything and then had held only memory. He thought about joy. He thought about how grief can either calcify into stone or, given time and the right conditions, become something else entirely. Something that moves, something that reaches, something that finds its way, however slowly, back toward the light. He thought, maybe that's what she meant all along. The city was bright outside the window. 44 floors below, people were moving in every direction, going about the 10,000 small urgent errands of their lives, entirely unaware that in a room above them, a man who had once been invisible was standing in the light and finally being seen. The world celebrates the loud ones, the powerful ones, the ones whose names go on buildings and whose faces end up on magazine covers and whose generosity comes with press releases attached. But there is another kind, the kind that shows up at midnight in the rain, the kind that signs its name on a sheet and rolls up its sleeve and asks for nothing, the kind that keeps going when its body is failing and its wallet is empty and the world has given it every possible reason to stop. Daniel Cole kept going. A little girl kept breathing. And somewhere, in the slow turning of things, that became a story worth telling. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones nobody notices. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we pass in the corridor every single day without looking up. Sometimes kindness has no audience, no applause, no record. Only a small life continuing, and a quiet man walking back out into the rain. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the light finds them. It found Daniel. If this story moved you even a little, please hit the like button right now and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Daniel's place? Could you have kept going? The comment section is yours. We read every single one. We'll see you in the next story.